staying at the hotel reported him missing at park security. A massive search began involving rangers, volunteers, and helicopters. They surveyed the area around Jenny Lake, including trails and bluffs where he might have gone. However, no trace or personal belongings of Paul were found. Even his drone, which could have given clues to his last whereabouts, has not been found. The only clue was the barely visible shoe tracks that suddenly broke off in the soft soil near the edge of the cliff. Paul Lammer's disappearance has spawned numerous theories, each attempting to explain what may have happened on that fateful day. While many of them have a rational basis, there are also speculations that go far beyond the conventional. Here's a detailed look at the major theories. Jenny Lake is surrounded by cliffs, narrow trails, and dense forests, making it potentially dangerous for hikers. Paul could have stumbled or lost his balance, especially if he was focused on capturing unique shots without noticing the surrounding danger. Footprints found near the cliff may indicate that Paul was too close to the edge. His equipment, including his camera and drone, may have fallen with him. The rangers carefully examined the bottom of the cliff and the bottom of the lake, but found no trace of a body, camera, or even fragments of clothing. If Paul had fallen, traces of it should have remained after the footprints have suddenly disappeared. It looks as if Paul just vaporized. Why didn't his body or equipment resurface in the lake? Yellowstone is known for cold water, but usually objects rise to the surface over time. Yellowstone is home to numerous wild animals, including grizzly bears and mountain lions. In theory, Paul could have been attacked by one of them. Bears, for example, are known for their curiosity and aggressive behavior, especially if disturbed. The attack could have been sudden, and Paul didn't even have time to report it by a phone or radio. Wild animals can also drag a body and personal belongings into hiding. Even if an animal has carried it away, there are usually traces of fur, blood, or particles of clothing left behind. Some people, including tourists and locals, believe Paul's disappearance is related to something unexplained, possibly supernatural. Yellowstone is surrounded by legends of strange events, including unexplained lights, mysterious sounds, and a watching sensation felt by many visitors. Paul's recent reports have indicated his discomfort and the feeling that someone is watching him. Tourists in the area have repeatedly reported shadows that appear at Jenny Lake, especially at dusk. These shadows are sometimes accompanied by a sudden drop in temperature and unexplained noises. But unfortunately, no material evidence of supernatural intervention has been found. It remains only a matter of faith and interpretation. Each theory has its basis, but none provides a definitive answer. The disappearance of Paul Lammers remains one of those cases that continues to stir the imagination of mystery lovers and researchers. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere at the intersection of all these speculations, hidden in the shadows of Yellowstone's mountains and crevices. In July of 1991, Daniel Kemp, a 25-year-old outdoor enthusiast from Bozeman, Montana, embarked on a 5-day hike in Yellowstone National Park that was supposed to be relaxing and full of adventure. Daniel was no stranger to the wilderness. Having grown up near the Rocky Mountains, he spent countless weekends hiking, traveling, and honing his survival skills. Yellowstone, with its vast, untouched wilderness, had always intrigued him, and this trip was a personal challenge for him to explore its little visited areas. Daniel carefully planned his route, which was to begin at the Beckler River and pass through the Shoshone Geyser Basin before ending in the Beaver Creek Valley. He informed his family of his route and took detailed maps, a compass, a sturdy tent, and enough food for the trip. Being an experienced outdoorsman, he also took along a first aid kit, hunting knife, and whistle in case of emergencies. Before leaving, Daniel promised his parents that he would check in at the end of the hike on July 19th. Confident in his abilities, he set off for the park on the morning of July 14th. Bright and sunny day, Daniel's journey began smoothly. Rangers on the trail near the Beckler River remembered him as polite and well-prepared, and several hikers reported seeing him on the trail on July 14th and 15th. He was last seen by a group of hikers in Shoshone Geyser Basin on the afternoon of July 15th. He spoke with them briefly, mentioning his plans to camp at Shoshone Lake in the evening, and then move toward Beaver Creek. Campers later recalled that Daniel seemed calm and confident, showing no signs of worry or anxiety. mentioned the unpredictable weather, but did not seem concerned about the possibility of a storm. This was the last confirmed meeting with him. When Daniel did not return home on July 19th, his parents became concerned. By July 21st, after no contact with Daniel, they alerted park management. A search and rescue operation began that same day, and rangers began at Shoshone Geyser Basin, the last known location of his whereabouts. The initial search centered on the trail between Shoshone Lake and Beaver Creek Valley. Rangers found evidence of a recent campground near the lake that matched Daniel's route. His camp looked untouched, his tent was still set up, and his backpack remained inside. However, one detail was immediately puzzling. His boots were neatly placed near the tent, and slightly damp socks were found nearby. There were no signs of animal fighting or disturbance, but Daniel was nowhere to be found. The search quickly intensified, with more than 50 people, search dogs, and helicopters equipped with infrared technology. For the next week, rescuers combed the surrounding area, paying special attention to nearby trails, ravines, and hot springs. The park's thermal springs posed a significant hazard, and rescuers feared Daniel might have accidentally fallen into one of the scalding pools. The searchers faced a number of challenges: difficult terrain. The Shoshone Geyser Basin is a remote area with treacherous terrain that includes smoking geysers, boiling mud pots, and dense forests. Weather conditions. Summer storms brought heavy rain and high winds, further complicating the search. By July 25th, the search had spread to areas beyond Daniel's planned route, but no new leads had emerged. One theory was that Daniel had gotten lost or disoriented after leaving his campsite. While that seems unlikely given his experience, Yellowstone's dense forests and changeable weather may have contributed to the confusion. Rangers noted that even experienced campers sometimes underestimate the vastness and complexity of the park. Yellowstone is home to bears, wolves, and mountain lions. Although the campground showed no signs of animal attacks, rangers could.
Online communities provide support for business finances, provide national housing and apps in one place. You can easily see where your business stands. In fact, 86% of customers say businesses simplify their business tasks. Automate tedious tasks, run your business on the go with a mobile app, and convince things to make confident business decisions. All the financial tools you need, all in one place. Grow your business. QuickBooks Online.
Don't trust your shirts to water down detergent. Choose Tide with 2 times the cleaning ingredients.
Rangers could not completely rule out the possibility of encountering wildlife elsewhere. The region around Lake Shoshone is dotted with geothermal springs. It is possible that Daniel, while exploring his surroundings, could have fallen into a boiling pool or been trapped in one of the park's hidden crevices. Although this rarely happens in Yellowstone, some have speculated on the possibility of foul play. This theory was not given much credence because the area was remote, and there was no indication that another person was near the campsite. By July 29th, after nearly 2 weeks of searching, the Park Service officially shut down the operation. Helicopters, infrared scans, and foot searches yielded no new evidence. Daniel Kemp was still missing, with only his campground and a few scattered belongings left as evidence. Daniel's disappearance shocked his family and friends. His disappearance seemed almost impossible to those who knew him as a careful and experienced outdoorsman. His parents placed a memorial bench at the trailhead on the Beckler River, where he started with the words, "For Daniel, who loved these wild places." The Bozeman community held vigils in Daniel's memory, and many volunteers joined the search in the early days, hoping to bring him home. Daniel Kemp's case remains one of Yellowstone's most enduring mysteries. Over the years, his story has been retold by hikers, rangers, and locals as a cautionary tale about the unpredictability of nature and the need to use extreme caution when visiting the backcountry. In the decades since its disappearance, the park has continued to emphasize the safety of solo hiking and has issued new guidelines for those venturing into remote areas. Despite numerous leads, Daniel Kemp's fate remains unknown, and his disappearance a chilling reminder that wilderness can both inspire and take those who fall into its depths. That's all for now, folks. Yellowstone National Park remains one of the most mysterious places on Earth, full of mystery and unexplained phenomena. If you like this episode, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell not to miss new videos about mystical stories and mysteries of the world. Share this video with your friends and write in the comments what you think about these mysterious disappearances. Perhaps you have your own theories. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episodes. There are places in the world where people go for adventure, inspiration, or to find themselves. But sometimes these journeys end in unexplained disappearances that defy logic and common sense. Today you will learn about two such mysterious cases. One took place in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, where conservationist Bruno Manzer, a man whose life was dedicated to fighting to preserve the rainforest, disappeared. The other was in the quiet forests of Washington State, where the trail of traveler Leah Roberts ended as abruptly as her adventure began. These stories are filled with strange circumstances, conflicting clues, and questions that no one has yet found answers to. They continue to unsettle people's minds with their unknown and twisted plots, making us wonder again and again what really happened. Born on August 25, 1954, in the Swiss city of Basel, Bruno Manzer's childhood was one of great promise and privilege. He grew up in a wealthy family and was a bright, free-thinking boy. However, despite the fact that his parents expected a career in medicine, young Bruno chose a different path. At the age of 19, Bruno was sentenced to 3 months in prison, refusing compulsory military service in Switzerland. Inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's idea of nonviolence, he relished his status as a political prisoner and upon leaving prison wished to live a simple and contented life. From 1973 to 1983, he worked as a shepherd in the Swiss Alps, practicing crafts, herbalism, and speleology. He learned to make, fire, and lay his own bricks. He fashioned leather, raised bees, and even made his own clothes by weaving the wool of the sheep he tended. And for a long time, this was enough to keep Bruno happy. But around the age of 30, he developed a deep and abiding thirst for travel. In 1984, Bruno visited the Malaysian state of Terengganu, where he joined an expedition to explore Gunung Mulu National Park. It was here that he first learned about the nomadic tribe known as the Pada. Bruno later said that he wanted to find the deeper essence of humanity in people who still live close to their nature. So he set out to find this tribe. Not satisfied after the first failures of any subsequent attempts, Bruno finally found the nomadic Penan tribes in the upper Linbang River in May 1984. At first, the Penan tribesmen simply ignored him, being too wary of the crazy white man to approach him. After a while, however, the Penans were impressed by Bruno's resilience, and after proving that he had no ill intentions, eventually accepted him into their villages. During his time with the Penans, Bruno learned all sorts of jungle survival skills. He became familiar with the Penan culture, learned their language, and was even welcomed into the court of the chief of the Penan tribe, Chief Longstega. Bruno wore a loincloth while hunting with the tribe's warriors, using a blowgun and poison darts to kill birds, primates, and even snakes. In Switzerland, Bruno was nicknamed Tarzan, and many said he had finally lost his mind. But among the Penans, he was known as Lucky Penan. Lucky Penan simply means Penan Man. But make no mistake, it was the highest compliment they could pay him. It was almost an official induction into the tribe. He had survived malaria, a near-fatal snake bite, and had survived a fall from a mountain after hanging from a rope for just under a day. It is obvious that Bruno could have coped with the jungle, but even more perplexing is what happened to him next. By 2000, Bruno had been making long trips into the rainforests of Southeast Asia for more than 15 years. He was actively involved in the fight against deforestation in the region, but unfortunately made many enemies in the process. He was hated by logging companies. He was hated by those who needed cheap timber. And because of his high-profile corruption allegations, Malaysian politicians tried to ban him from entering their country. Bruno was forced to turn his sights to Indonesia. And in February 2000, he found himself on the jungle trails well as the organization's secretary, John Wesley. There he separated Wesley and the film crew and continued his journey with another unarmed companion. The journey lasted 2 weeks, crossing mountains and rivers unpolluted by boat, the only respite being a few hours of sleep in a canvas hammock. On May 18th, Bruno reached the border of Sarawak and Kalimantan. There, Bruno and his companions spent their last night writing a short message on a postcard to his girlfriend Charlotte, who had remained in Switzerland. Taking an oath that he would see to the delivery, Bruno gave the postcard to his companion, who later said that he looked perfectly happy and healthy when they parted. Afterward, Bruno went off into the jungle alone. According to John Wesley, Bruno crossed the Sarawak-Kalimantan border on May 22nd. He was then spotted by a Pinyan friend, a man named Palyu. On May 25th, Palyu said Bruno was carrying a 30-kilogram backpack and was heading toward a mountain called Bantu Lao. Bruno told Palyu that he intended to climb the mountain. When asked if he needed company or help, Bruno declined. Palyu wished him luck and said goodbye, but he did not know that this was the last time anyone would see Bruno alive. After Bruno did not return to the Foundation campground within the allotted time, John Wesley and the film crew enlisted the help of Pennant tribesmen to find him. They surveyed the area around the Limbang River and even tracked down Bruno's last campsite before his attempt to climb Batu Lawi. They followed Bruno's machete trail through dense forests until the trail reached a swamp in Batu Lawi, but unfortunately there was no sign of him returning from the swamp, or of anyone else who had come to the area. The Bruno Foundation paid for a search and rescue helicopter as well as a mountaineering team to traverse the limestone peaks of the mountain. However, citing extreme danger, none of the climbers wanted to tackle the last 100 meters of the steep limestone that forms the summit of Batu Lawi. After the descent, the climbers concluded that if Bruno had attempted the limestone summit, it was very likely that some tragic accident would have befallen him. With this in mind, they made a second trip up Batu Lawi, focusing on places where Bruno might have landed in the event of an unfortunate fall. However, mysteriously, no trace of Bruno's body, equipment, or clothing was found. The climbers enlisted the help of 2 very experienced local guides and asked for their opinion on where Bruno's body might have gone. They spent several days searching various nooks and crannies, but again, finding nothing, the local guides were extremely puzzled by their opinion. If Bruno was not in the places they predicted, they had to rule out a mountaineering accident as the cause of his disappearance. If Bruno had climbed the mountain, he must have come down alive. There was simply no other explanation for why he was gone, at least not a rational one. Upon learning of Bruno's disappearance, his friend Charlotte contacted the Foundation to inform them of the important event. In the last postcard he had written to her before climbing the mountains, Bruno complained of diarrhea and a broken rib. He also complained of extreme fatigue, but was determined to accomplish something he had forgotten to tell her about in the postcard. It seems that Bruno was searching for something that compelled him to venture alone into the jungles of Indonesia. But what if the object of Bruno's search was the very thing that made others search for him in turn? As the search became increasingly desperate, Bruno's distraught companions enlisted the help of psychics, soothsayers, and even tribal necromancers. In some cases, their predictions diverged dramatically, but they all agreed on one thing: Bruno was alive. Encouraged by the supposedly supernatural insight of their consultant, the Bruno Foundation asked the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs to launch an official investigation into his disappearance. They agreed, and another search party set out into the jungle in hopes of bringing Bruno home. But this time, too, despite the huge amount of money and man-hours spent on the search, their efforts were fruitless, and they returned empty-handed. In November 2001, Bruno was honored with an award from the International Society for Human Rights. This award should have meant a lot to a man who had dedicated his life to defending the rights of indigenous peoples. Just a few months later, however, he was presented with an award that he may have considered even more significant. In January 2002, hundreds of Penan tribal members gathered for a funeral ceremony known as Hatawai. They paid tribute to the missing Bruno Manser, celebrating his life and courage, and then said goodbye to his eternal spirit. The tribal leaders called him Lucky Tuan, or the one who was lost, as saying the names of the recently deceased is a great taboo in Venetian culture. After subsequent expeditions failed to find any trace of Bruno, the civil court in Wasserstadt declared him legally dead on March 10, 2005. 5 years later, to mark the 10th anniversary of the disappearance, a memorial service was held at the Elizabethan Church in Boston. It was attended by about 500 people. No one called him Tarzan anymore, and only a few addressed him as Bruno out of respect. He was Lucky Tuan, a man who lost his heart in the jungles of Southeast Asia and later lost his life.
No, fish.
Leah Roberts was born on July 23, 1976, in Durham, North Carolina. She was described as a talkative, easygoing girl with a thick Carolina accent and a deep love of music. By the age of 23, Leah was leading a comfortable life in the town of Raleigh, North Carolina, with her longtime friend and roommate Nicole. But her young life was irreparably marred by tragedy. When she was just 17 years old, Leah's father was diagnosed with a long-term respiratory illness, and just 3 years later, her mother died unexpectedly of a heart condition. Leah took a leave of absence to recover from her deep and sudden grief, but when she returned in the fall of 1998, she was nearly killed in a horrific car accident. Her lung was punctured, her femur shattered, and she required a metal rod to be inserted along the length of the bone. In 1999, Leah's dying father passed away during the night. She subsequently withdrew again, which gave her time to help organize her father's upcoming funeral and divide his estate. But it was during this time, or perhaps as a result of the grief she experienced, that Leah became increasingly interested in philosophy and spirituality. Her passion for these topics continued to grow. Despite returning to college in the fall of '99, she spent much more time pursuing her new hobbies than earning her degree. She continued to get good grades and kept partying to a minimum. But then, just a few months before graduating from college, she dropped out. Her friends and family were shocked. But to Leah, it made perfect sense. She didn't need a degree. She wanted to travel. And if the previous few years had taught her anything, it was that you can't waste a minute. But unfortunately, Leah's newfound sense of wanderlust would ultimately be her undoing. On March 9, 2000, Leah and her sister Kara had a long phone conversation. They agreed to babysit the next day and then visit the homes of mutual friends the following days. Ironically, however, Leah never followed through on these promises. That same evening, she packed her bags, took her pet cat, Bia, and set off on a 5,000-kilometer solo road trip across the United States. The next day, when Leah didn't show up for her babysitter's appointment, Kara just assumed her sister had changed her mind. Leah was still processing the loss of her father, so the change of plans didn't cause her any hard feelings. It wasn't until March 13th that Kara realized something was wrong. That's when she went to her sister's apartment to check on her. Finding the front door unlocked, Kara began searching Leah's apartment. As she entered the bedroom, she found a notebook with the words, "Read me," scrawled on the cover. Kara took it, opened it, and found a handwritten note and $3,000 in cash. The note was addressed to her roommate, and it said it was to pay the bills while I was gone. It also said, "Remember, we are all together in thoughts and prayers, and time passes quickly. Believe in me for yourself. Help Shep and Lily's house so the kids can have fun. Give Peter my laptop. Give everyone my love. See you soon. Tell Kara not to worry, although she will, per script Leah." Underneath the main text, Leah appears to have scribbled a few more messages on April 23rd. One of them read, "On the road." A second message read, "She'll understand." A third additional message gave her friend permission to stay in her room if she ever came to her town. Leah loved to read books, and one of her favorite authors was Jack Kerouac, and she had a special love for the work of Dharma Burns. According to a close friend, she especially loved the part where Kerouac spends the summer of 1956 as a firefighter on Desolation Peak in rural Washington state. Kara, who had obtained power of attorney for Leah, used it to get her sister's bank records. They showed that Leah was traveling to Washington through the Southwest and West Coast. She was repeating Kerouac's journey. Kara soon discovered that Leah had spent the night of March 10th in Lebanon, Tennessee, and had reached Brooks, Oregon by March 13th. 9 days later, two joggers jogging on a trail in Washington's Whatcom County made a strange discovery while advancing along the trail. While jogging, they noticed an item of clothing hanging from a tree. Further searching led to the discovery of a second article of clothing, after which their attention was drawn to a white vehicle that was parked at the foot of a roadside embankment with heavy damage. The vehicle was a 1993 Jeep Cherokee that was parked on the left side of Canyon Creek Road, just over 30 miles east of Bellingham. The exterior of the vehicle was heavily damaged, with windows shattered and the front of the Jeep crumpled, indicating a severe frontal collision. The ground around the Jeep was strewn with clothing and scattered personal items, including a guitar, passport, driver's license, checkbook, and several CDs. Several blankets had been thrown over the car's broken windows, suggesting someone had used it as a shelter from the elements. But when two concerned joggers shouted to the driver, they were met with only silence. The investigator who arrived on the scene estimated that the Jeep must have been traveling at about 100 kilometers per hour for it to have sustained such external damage. It also rolled over several times before coming to a stop in a thicket of fallen trees arranged vertically and parallel to the road. The investigator stated that anyone in the car at the time of such a crash would have been seriously injured, if not killed. However, detectives were unable to find any evidence that anyone was in the car at the time of the accident. No traces of hair or blood were found. The seatbelt had not been pulled, and there was no damage consistent with the head hitting the steering wheel or windshield. The driver seemed to have simply vanished behind the wheel of his vehicle. It soon became clear that the owner of the Jeep, who reported missing a few days earlier, was none other than Leah Roberts. Surveillance footage from a Brooks gas station showed her looking out the window while the clerk paid her bill, as if concerned that she was being watched, but the veracity of that version was never established. In the days following the discovery of the Jeep, two search and rescue teams combed the area around it with dogs and a helicopter, but unfortunately, they found no trace of Leah or her missing pet cat. Search and rescue experts strongly doubted that Leah got lost and died in the woods because she could have been moderately to severely injured after the accident. But they also cited the lack of blood and seatbelts, and one officer even suggested that Leah had intentionally crashed the car.
Gillette rebar ain't no gimmick. It releases trapped hairs for a closer shape. Hey, I was gonna say that.
Intentionally crashed the car while not driving to use it as a makeshift shelter. In his opinion, this was the worst possible scenario because he quite rightly assumed she was not in her right mind. It doesn't surprise me that she might have gone off and tried to find herself. Leah's brother told me a few days after her disappearance. I was worried about her, but I wasn't really concerned until we got the call that they found her car. A thorough search of the Jeep found $2,500 stuffed in her jeans, a decorative box containing a ticket to the 2:10 p.m. showing of the movie American Beauty at the Bellis Fairmont the day she arrived. But what concerned Leah's family and friends the most was the discovery of her mother's wedding ring, which appeared to have been abandoned in her Jeep. Leah's loved ones knew that the ring was her most precious earthly possession, the one thing she treasured more than anything else. If she thought she was leaving her Jeep and never coming back, those close to her had no doubt that Leah would take it with her. Its presence in the Jeep indicated that Leah intended to return to retrieve it. In that case, what prevented her from doing so? When Washington law enforcement put out a call to the public, there were several very credible allegations. An unidentified man told detectives that he and his wife had met a young woman matching Leah's description at a gas station in Everett, about 100 kilometers south of Bellingham. The man further reported that the woman seemed severely disoriented and made the rather disturbing statement that she didn't know who she was or where she lived. Naturally, the detective believed the man was trying to help and began asking him additional questions regarding this strange encounter. However, after demonstrating an inability to answer the questions, the man hung up and the detectives were unable to re-establish contact due to the nature of the anonymous line. This is perhaps the most frustrating aspect of Leah's missing persons case. The detectives may well have been speaking to a man who was well aware of her whereabouts, but may have been deliberately trying to deceive them. On March 21st, 2000, Leah's two siblings traveled to Washington State to help search for her. Their first destination was the Bellysphere Mall, where Leah had gone to a screening of the movie American Beauty, in the hope that someone in the audience would recognize her. None of the movie theater employees remembered her face, but at the Elephant and Castle restaurant, employees said they spotted Leah at the bar on March 13th, chatting cheerfully with other customers. The day after the brothers returned to North Carolina, one of the men who had been socializing with Leah at the restaurant heard news of her disappearance and contacted detectives. The man, whose name has not been released, described her as very friendly and talkative, but he eventually saw her leave the restaurant alone. Detectives later tracked down another customer at the bar, also described the man as warm and friendly. He also recalled talking to her about Jack Kerouac and how he was connected to her reasons for visiting Washington State. Contrary to what the first witness said, a second visitor claimed that Leah left the restaurant with a man she identified as Barry. This man gave such a detailed description of Barry that authorities arranged for him to meet with an artist who created a composite drawing of the main figure in the case. However, detectives were never able to verify whether Barry even existed, and found it highly suspicious that the second art painter's account directly contradicted that of the first. When pressed to identify inconsistencies between the two stories, the second customer's behavior became so bizarre that investigators began to question whether Barry was simply a fabrication designed to mislead them. After searching Leah's car, detectives asked Kara what she wanted them to do with the vehicle, and she told them to leave it behind, hoping that future technological advances would yield more clues. In 2006, her decision paid off. When detectives Jamie Collins and Alan Smith reviewed the case file, they realized that the Jeep had not been searched as thoroughly as they had previously thought. Although the interior had been processed for blood, hair, and fibers, it had not occurred to anyone to examine the hood of the vehicle for evidence. When they opened the hood, they found that a wire had been removed from the starter relay. This meant that someone could have turned on the ignition and then manually pressed the starter relay, which would have allowed the Jeep to drive itself down the embankment without the driver in the car. In addition, fingerprints of an unknown person were found under the hood of the vehicle. It appears that the Jeep had been broken into, and it would have taken someone with mechanical knowledge to manipulate the vehicle in this manner, Detective Smith said, knowing full well that his conclusion was opening up new and horrifying facets to the case. There was one person who was interested in such an experience, a man who said he saw Leah leaving Barry. This man, who had moved to Canada by the time of the investigation, had previously served in the military and had extensive experience as an auto mechanic. It took 2 years to get fingerprints from Canadian authorities, but when they finally got them, they were disappointed to learn there was no match. Then, in the spring of 2010, authorities obtained a DNA sample from an undisclosed item in Leah's car. In 2011, they were going to compare that DNA to that of a person of interest. The results of that test are still unknown. As of today, there is no update on the case. Leah's missing person posters, which were once plastered all over Washington State, are now weathered and frayed. That's it for now, folks. These mysterious disappearances leave more questions than answers, and remind us how unpredictable and mysterious our world is. If you are interested, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next episodes. People disappear every day. Some are victims of accidents, others of deliberate crimes. But there are some disappearances that can't be explained. Tracks are blown in the middle of nowhere. Eyewitness accounts get muddled with chilling details. and rescuers face mysteries that defy logic and common sense. Something remains beyond the limits of understanding, as if nature itself crosses people out of this world, leaving no chance to return. In this issue, you will learn about 3 mysterious cases, each of which occurred under strange and inexplicable circumstances. Children, experienced hikers, hunters. No one is immune when familiar landscapes turn into deadly traps. Where is the boundary between reality and irretrievable disappearance? Mysterious forests, merciless deserts, cold swamps. These are places where the laws of physics seem to be broken, and the mind begins to doubt what you see. One step out of place, and you're lost forever. What happened to them? Where do you look for answers? Sometimes even the investigators come away with nothing, and all that's left is emptiness, invisible fear, and stories that keep you wondering even decades later. On the morning of June 25th, 1983, the Marshall family woke up early and headed toward the Elkhorn Mountains in Montana. Kim Marshall, a member of the Capital City Radio Club, had been invited to attend a radio operator's picnic in the Helena National Forest, which covers about 1 million acres in west central Montana. It was a beautiful Saturday morning with a clear blue summer sky, and Kim was accompanied that day by his 4-year-old stepdaughter, Naylin Marshall. Even though she was a child of divorce, Naylin was a happy and motivated person. Only Kim and Naylin were going to attend the radio operator's picnic that morning. But when they arrived, Naylin noticed several other children playing in the shallow waters of Mountain Creek. Naylin told her stepfather that she wanted to play with the other children, but not wanting to let her go unsupervised, Kim refused. Moments later, a 13-year-old girl approached the hesitant Kim and offered to watch Naylin while he greeted his radio friends. The teenager revealed that they had been catching frogs and offered to teach Naylin nothing to say. Kim thanked the girl, told Naylin to go with her, and then headed off to meet his friends. It seemed to him that the teenage girl would be vigilant, keeping an eye on his young stepdaughter. But he was mistaken. Upon returning to Mountain Creek, he found that the 13-year-old girl who was supposed to be watching over Naylin had reported her missing. The girl told Naylin to stay by the creek and focus on catching frogs and tadpoles, but the girl didn't seem to be paying attention. What started out as normal anxiety soon turned into an eerie panic. As Kim began shouting out her stepdaughter's name, more and more picnic attendees joined the search for 4-year-old Naylin. Kim Marshall was horrified by the sudden disappearance of his stepdaughter, but that horror only intensified as he familiarized himself with the surrounding area. Moffett Creek was surrounded on all sides by dense forests, steep rocky cliffs, and deep, dark mines miles underground.
For words 24 seconds, fuel 99.9% of funds trapped. How does HR?
I had eyes on a hostile 18 soldier just east of your location.
Miles underground, deadly danger lurked on all sides, and so the intensity of the search increased dramatically. But when Kim asked a group of girls if they had seen little Naylin, the answer they gave was enough to send Kim into a panic attack. According to the girls, little Naylin was seen talking to an unfamiliar man wearing a purple tracksuit. One of them later told police that the man suggested they play a so-called shadow game, in which the children would follow his shadow. The older children, who had been thoroughly indoctrinated that strangers were dangerous, refused the stranger's request. Little Naylin, however, was not so simple. After a missing persons report was filed, Montana search and rescue teams launched a massive search that covered nearly 1,000 square miles. At the height of operations, in addition to dozens of paid professionals, nearly 3,000 civilian volunteers were involved in the search for 4-year-old Naylin. Helicopter search teams surveyed the area from the air using thermal imaging cameras in hopes of pinpointing Naylin's exact location. Special K-9 teams were called in, combing mines, ravines, and waterways, including Moffett Creek, where Naylin used to play before her sudden disappearance. The report said that one of the dogs who had been tracing the bags to the creek after detecting Nalen's scent stopped abruptly. For many, this was cause to ponder something deeply chilling. Little Nalen had been suddenly and violently snatched from the land and then carried off with footprints. Fearing foul play, search and rescue teams stepped up their efforts, scouring the surrounding hills and forests for any trace of the missing girl. However, after just 5 days, the weather in the region took a sharp turn for the worse, and authorities suspended the search until safer conditions prevailed. In the absence of professionals, many civilian volunteers continued the search, despite the harsh weather and danger through Nalen. Unfortunately, on the 10th day of the search, the highest-ranking official announced that the operation had been called off. The decision sparked outrage among volunteers who couldn't believe that search and rescue personnel were simply packing up and leaving. "I have children of my own," said one of the civilian volunteers, who had tears in his eyes as he spoke to reporters. "I sympathize with the mother. What happened here is horrible, just horrible." In the months that followed, Nalen's face began to appear everywhere. On billboards, milk cartons, paper bags, and supermarkets. All the ads listed the number of an anonymous phone line that received calls with any information about the girl's whereabouts. The messages came from all over the world, but unfortunately none of them provided concrete leads. Most of the calls were false, and some were so conclusive that they could not be verified. However, just over 2 years after Nalen's disappearance, an event occurred that shocked law enforcement. On November 27, 1985, the National Center for Missing and Exploding Children received an anonymous call. The person on the other end of the line claimed that he had kidnapped Nalen and knew where she was. The call caused quite a stir. The voice sounded confident, and the details he provided indicated an intimate knowledge of the case. At first, the police had their doubts. Could it have been a cruel prank? But 2 months later, Childline of America, an organization that also searches for missing children, received a typewritten letter from an unidentified man. In the letter, the author repeated his claims, calling the girl Kay and asserting that he had kidnapped her in order to raise her as his own daughter. Police and investigators treated the letter with special scrutiny, especially after noticing one frightening paragraph containing details that had never been released to the press. He was aware of facts that only investigators knew, said Detective Kevin Hughes. "We could not ignore that letter and began to consider his statements authentic." In his letter, John Doe claimed to have a steady income from investments, allowing him to live an isolated lifestyle and devote himself to his favorite passion, child abduction. He described how he travels with Nalen across the U.S., Canada, and even the UK using fake documents. Excerpts from the letters were particularly gruesome. "I picked up Kay by the roadside. She was crying and shivering, and I decided to take her with me. She's mine now. She smiles and laughs, and trust me, I love her and I can't let her go." The letters kept coming, and their content became increasingly disturbing. In one, an anonymous man stated that Nalen had been abused, but assured that it wouldn't hurt her physically. The FBI joined the investigation, tracing the calls and letters to several phone booths and post offices in Wisconsin. However, as soon as police began their pursuit, the trail was cut off. It seemed the kidnapper was always one step ahead. 5 years later, in 1991, the Nalen case gained publicity again with an episode of the show Unsolved Mysteries, where producers presented copies of the letters and recounted the kidnapping on national television. The episode sparked a flurry of reports and calls with the real scoop came months later. Richard James Wilson, 42, Montana resident, appeared before police and confessed to kidnapping and killing Nalen. He also claimed to have been involved in the death of another woman. At first, this confession raised hopes that the case would finally be closed. However, police soon discovered that Wilson's testimony was full of inconsistencies. He was brought to the area where he allegedly disposed of Nalen's body. Wilson was unable to pinpoint a specific location. The finds he mentioned did not match his descriptions, and a careful inspection of the area yielded nothing. After checking Wilson's mental state, it became clear that he was suffering from severe mental illness, and his confession was not true.
Oh, ladies and men.
But The evidence against him is non-existent, Jefferson County Sheriff Tom Dodd said. In 1995, a new tragedy befell the Marshall family. After moving to Japan and making plans for a new beginning, Kim and Nancy Marshall decided to move to Mexico. Nancy went ahead to find a place to live, but was soon found dead in her hotel room. Although Mexican authorities initially claimed death was natural, further investigation revealed that Nancy had been found and beaten, and valuables were missing from her room. It was only through the efforts of private investigators and pressure from Kim that the case status was changed to suspicious homicide. 20 years later, in 2018, new attention to the Nancy case was brought to the case of letters mailed from Cincinnati, Ohio. Companies and individuals received envelopes with no return address, mysterious messages related to the girl's disappearance. The National Center for Missing Children published an image of Nayla with age progression. She could now be 43 years old. Decades after her disappearance, the case remains open and the calls and letters continue to pour in. Sheriff Greg Duvall expressed cautious optimism. We always hope for the best. Maybe she's alive, maybe she doesn't remember her past. We will never stop looking. On July 20th, 2006, the Randolph family embarked across the southwestern United States. James Randolph, a 42-year-old civil engineer, was a man confident in himself and his abilities. He loved adventure and often told his friends, "Why waste time on hiking trails when you can explore the unknown?" His wife, Laura, 39, a geography teacher, supported her husband, finding such trips romantic and in their own way, good for their children, Tyler, 12, and Marilyn, 9. Their transportation was a 2004 black Jeep Grand Cherokee, a sturdy, reliable vehicle they considered ideal for long off-road trips. Their route covered the desert areas of Arizona and Utah, with a final stop in Zion National Park. However, determined to take a shortcut and avoid crowded highways, James insisted on driving through a little-known section of the Sonora Desert, known for its sandy plains, sweltering heat, and lack of cell phone service. On the morning of July 21st, the family left the small town of Tucson and made quickly purchases at a local store: water, food, and gasoline. After filling their car to the full tank, they headed southwest on Highway 86. The last surveillance tape at the gas station captured Laura adjusting her glasses and smiling at James. The children were in the back seat, keeping their eyes on their handheld game consoles. Around noon, turning off the main highway onto a dirt road, they drove into the desert. On the map, it wasn't a difficult stretch connecting two small towns, but in reality, the road was riddled with ravines, and the temperature reached 47 degrees Celsius. After a few hours, they stopped seeing other cars. The last contact with James occurred at 3:27 p.m. He sent a short text message to his brother Michael. "Shortcut through the desert, all okay, call you later." That message was the last one he ever sent. On July 29, 2006, 8 days after the Randolphs stopped contacting each other, Arizona authorities launched a search operation. They interviewed family, friends, and relatives and obtained a map of the estimated route. The light trail of the SUV.
Looking.com has all kinds of things for those who love family resorts. For those who do not.
Hey, James, some fucking bitch.
Exactly what you're looking for. Booking.com, Booking.yeah.
Life doesn't stop when you're getting an education. That's why Sophia offers self-paced, online, college-level courses that are designed to transfer. Access 70+ courses for only $99 a month and start learning today.
The SUV was found 2 days later on a remote sandy road near the Gila River. When the rescue team reached the vehicle, they were confronted with a strange and frightening sight. A black Jeep Grand Cherokee stood in the middle of a perfectly flat road. The car was in good condition. The wheels were intact, the windows were not broken. There were no signs of an accident. The tank was fully filled with gasoline, and inside was a few days' supply of water and untouched groceries. However, the interior of the car was empty. The ignition key was lying on the driver's seat and the doors had been left open. Around the car were observed haphazard footprints that diverged in different directions. At first, it appeared that people were walking in circles, but upon close inspection, investigators noticed something strange. The footprints suddenly broke off in the sand, as if their owners had vanished. The rescuers who first reached the car were experienced people. They had been involved in searching for missing hikers in the mountains and deserts of Arizona for years, but what they found around the car threw them off balance. Footprints, deep, clear footprints, led away from the car, fanning out in all directions. It seemed as if each member of the family had gone in a different direction. The sand, in which the footprints remained clearly visible, stretched for several meters from the car, but then they broke off. There was no sign of a return, no sign of continuing onward. One of the investigators later said that at that moment he felt as if people had just been picked up off the ground. The inside of the vehicle was also not a mess. Laura and James' phones, their portable chargers, and maps were on the front seat. The backpack in the back seat contained the children's personal items: Tyler's toy, Marilyn's notebook, and books. The strangest item in the cabin was a mirror pin, neatly leaned against the passenger. Though neither Laura nor James had mentioned that they were carrying anything like that. After inspecting the car and its contents, the rescuers noticed the temperature anomalies. The interior of the SUV had a much lower temperature than the outside, although the windows were tightly closed. Local experts attributed this to the fact that the car had been parked in the sun for a long time. There's no logic to it. The dashboard was cold to the touch, and the water bottle seemed slightly frosted. On July 30th, 2006, the search for the Randolph family was expanded. Helicopters, field crews, and additional volunteer crews were brought in. However, the area where the car was found was notorious for its dangers. Dense thickets of chaparral and cacti alternated with sand dunes, and in the heat of over 50 degrees, neither people nor dogs were long. Several finds were made during the search. About 200 meters from the vehicle, the team found evidence of a strange hole in the sand. It was deep, with smooth walls, as if someone had dug it out on purpose and then filled it back in. Footprints were also visible around the hole, but they belonged to a person, not four. Another group came across a child's hairband worn by Marilyn snagged on the porch. The edge was clean, not frayed, as if someone had carefully placed it there hours ago. Meanwhile, desert anomaly experts began to consider alternative hypotheses. The Sonora region is known for a phenomenon that is called dead silence. Travelers have repeatedly reported that in certain parts of the desert, sounds disappear. You can't hear the wind, footsteps, or even your own breathing. Many claim to lose their sense of time and orientation, and some claim to see mirages or human figures that seem to call to them. However, scientists could not confirm this information. Climate scientists have speculated that the Randolphs may have been victims of heat stroke and hallucinations caused by the extreme heat, but no one could explain why the family left the car with a full tank of fuel and water and footprints skirting the void. On August 1st, 2006, 10 days after the disappearance, investigators decided to resort to aerial photography. Helicopters scoured the area, taking pictures of the terrain. One of the images captured something strange, a barely distinguishable figure standing in the middle of a sandy plain, about 3 kilometers from where the car was found. However, when the rescue team went there, all they found was flat sand and deep silence. There were no human or animal tracks in the area. On the third day of the search, rescuers and volunteers began to delve further into the Sonora Desert, following the suspected footprints of the Randolph family. But the pattern remained disturbing and haphazard, with footprints around the SUV diverging in several directions,
Fish!
as if the people were trying to return, but had lost their way. No signs of a struggle or the presence of other people were found. Experts speculated that the high...
Get away from having to just get here. This is what travel can be.
No signs of a struggle or the presence of other people were found. Experts speculated that the high temperature and lack of shade could have caused disorientation, especially if a family member had heat stroke or hallucinations due to dehydration. The sand here was loose and left deep footprints, but further down the trail there were increasingly frequent places where footsteps broke off and were lost among the margins. Rescuers divided the area into quadrants,